Don't you even know this much? Daniel's voice echoed through the entire dining hall. The chopsticks slipped from my hand, and a long strand of hot noodles slid from the plate onto the floor. The sound was small, but the silence that followed was unbearably heavy. My mother-in-law, sitting across from me, let out a quiet sigh. The children giggled, but I could see it in their eyes, curiosity mixed with fear. I said softly, "It's just food, Daniel." But Daniel was already worked up. "Food? This is your carelessness, Jiaxin. Every time there's some drama, why can't you ever manage us?" His words struck my ears like hammers. I stayed quiet, outwardly calm, but inside, a fire raged. This was his way, belittling me in public, training me into silence. I remembered how, back in Chengdu, my father used to do the same. To my mother, to me, the same humiliation, the same contempt. And now, in London, history was repeating itself. But this time, I wasn't going to stay silent. I raised my eyes and looked at Daniel. I smiled, a faint, cold smile. He thought I was yielding. But in truth, in that moment, my revenge had begun. They say a Chinese woman is defined by her patience. Since childhood we are taught, endure, stay quiet, everything will be fine. But I am Jiaxin, and I had decided, from now on my silence would not be my defeat, it would be my weapon. That night, when the quarrel happened, the family thought it was just a small spat between husband and wife, but they didn't know. This was the first chapter of my story. I was born in Chengdu, China. From the outside, our family looked prosperous and respected. My father, Chen Ming, was a wealthy businessman, import-export trade. My mother was always quiet, as if someone had stolen her voice, and I was always full of questions. But my questions never had answers. At night, strangers would come home, whispers filled the air, bundles of money changed hands. I would ask, "Papa, who are these people?" He would laugh and say, "Business friends." But in his eyes, there was always some fear, some hidden secret. And then one day, without warning, he sent me to England. He said, "You must study. London is right for you." But my heart knew he was sending me away from his secrets. When I reached London, everything was new. The cold air, the crowds, the gnawing feeling that I was alone. I joined university, slowly made friends, and that's where I met Daniel. Daniel was British, belonging to a completely different world. At first, he supported me a lot. Whenever I felt lost, he would say, "Don't worry, Jiaxin, I'll take care of you." I trusted him, perhaps because I so badly wanted someone to hold me. But slowly I realized Daniel didn't lift me up. He only made himself look bigger by making me look small. At every party, every dinner, he put me down. And his mother? She never sided with me either. 6 months after I came to London, I received a mysterious parcel from China. Inside were old bank statements and a letter. "Your father is not who you think he is. Find the truth, but be ready." The bank statements belonged to a shell company in England. The name? Connected to Daniel's family. My heart skipped a beat. So was my husband and his family tied to my father's secret dealings all along? And if yes, then what was my marriage? Love or just a transaction? That night after dinner, when everyone had gone to their rooms, I stood by the kitchen window. Outside, London's cold wind was blowing, but inside me there was an even colder storm. Daniel had humiliated me once again, but this time what hurt wasn't his insult. It was the memory of that parcel. My father and Daniel's family? How could there be a connection between them? And if it was true, then my marriage, my entire life, was it nothing more than a plan? My hand instinctively reached for the pendant, the same jade pendant my mother had given me. Its cool touch reminded me, "Find the truth, Jiaxin." The next morning at breakfast, I studied Daniel carefully. He sat quietly, sipping coffee, flipping through the newspaper. He looked normal, but I noticed, whenever his father's name appeared in the headlines, his fingers tightened unconsciously. "Why did you humiliate me in front of everyone last night?" I asked softly. He set the paper down and said, "Why do you take everything so seriously, Jiaxin? It was just a small thing." But the lie was clear in his eyes. He always did this, dismissing big things by calling them small. A few days later, I got the chance to step into Daniel's study. He was at the office, and I thought, maybe I'd find some answers there. The door was half open. Inside, shelves were lined with books, but my eyes were drawn to one particular drawer. It was locked. I tried but couldn't open it. Yet stuck on the drawer was a slip of paper with the name of a company, Eastbridge Trading Limited, the very same name from those bank statements. The ground slipped beneath my feet. I remembered, early in my days in London, before Daniel, I had met Adrian. He had tried to pull me into his world. I considered him a friend, but at a party, I had overheard someone say that his family too was connected to Eastbridge Trading. At that time, I thought little of it, just wealthy business circles. But now it was becoming clear. It was all a web. Daniel, Adrian, their families, and my father, all bound by invisible threads. That night, I lay awake in bed. Daniel slept beside me, but even the sound of his breathing felt staged. I made up my mind. If they thought I would remain silent forever, they were wrong. My revenge would be one of silence. I would expose their secrets in such a way that they would be disgraced in their own society. I didn't want blood. I wanted their trust, their honor, their respectable facade ripped away. I began my research. Days in the university library, nights on my laptop, searching for records of Eastbridge Trading Limited. In the company register, I found the names of the directors, Daniel's father and my father. My heart pounded. So it was true. Daniel and I were not just husband and wife. We were part of a family alliance. Our marriage was nothing but a business arrangement. One evening, Daniel and I attended his office party. His mother was there and several business partners. Laughter, chatter, glasses clinking. Then I overheard someone joke. Sending Chen's daughter here was the smartest move. Now she's under our control too. Everyone laughed. My breath caught. So this was the truth? I wasn't a wife. I was part of a deal. That was the moment I decided, if this was a game, then I would play too. But by my own rules. Outwardly, I would keep smiling, play the role of the obedient wife. But inside, I would quietly shake their foundations. Daniel thought he humiliated me at that dinner table. But the truth was, his words had given me my weapon. On the drive home after the party, Daniel kept talking about the new contracts signed, who praised him, which deals would be secured in the future. I smiled faintly at every word. "You had a good time, right?" he asked. I nodded. "Yes, very." But inside, I was recording everything, every word, every face, every laugh. They thought I was ignorant, but the real game was only beginning. A few days later, another envelope arrived from China, this time from my mother. Her handwriting trembled across the page. "Jiaxin, I sent you away because I was afraid you would suffocate here, but perhaps I made a mistake. The game your father is playing has now reached into your life. Trust will be hard, but remember, your only weapon is your truth. Never lose it." I held the envelope against my chest and closed my eyes. Mother had always learned to stay silent, but now her silence was a warning for me. Slowly, I began to observe Daniel more carefully. He introduced me to everyone as my wife, but at home he often said, "You should understand that this marriage is only for appearances." His words pierced like arrows, but I did not reply. I had learned, if you want revenge, first you must make your enemy believe you are weak. So that's what I did. Pretended to be weak. One night, when Daniel came home late from the office, I happened to see a missed call on his phone. The number wasn't saved, but the country code was China. My heart began to pound. Was Daniel speaking directly to my father? I noted down the number, and the next day, from the library, I emailed an old friend, Liang. He was a journalist in Chengdu. I told him, "Find out about this number." Liang replied, "This number belongs to an old warehouse in the city where your father's network operates." Darkness seemed to fall before my eyes. Around this time, I met Adrian again. I suddenly saw him in a cafe. Jiaxin? After so many years? I smiled and said, "Yes, it's been a long time." Adrian offered me coffee. There was the same old warmth in his eyes, but this time I could not be deceived. During the conversation, he casually said, "Eastbridge has grown a lot now. Daniel is lucky to have you as his wife." I looked into his eyes and smiled faintly. Who is really lucky, Adrian? Time will tell. That night, I took out a notebook and for the first time wrote clearly. Daniel and his father's company, Eastbridge. Adrian's family also involved. Father the root of it all. Jiaxin used as a pawn. And then at the very top I wrote, "Now the game will be played by my rules." I slowly began to trap Daniel in his own world. Whenever he belittled me in front of friends or family, I smiled and lowered my head. But later, when he was alone, I would quietly ask small questions that made him suspect I knew everything. "Daniel, why is your father's company called Eastbridge? Have you ever thought about what link it has to my father's business?" The color drained from his face. He laughed and said, "You don't understand any of this." But I did understand, and I could feel his fear. London society is different from Chinese society, but one thing is the same. Here too, people value reputation above all. I knew if I struck at Daniel and his family's reputation, that would be their greatest downfall. No need for blood. Just the exposure of their secrets. One night I stood alone by the Thames River. The air was cold, but inside my heart a fire burned. I whispered to myself, I am no longer the girl who silently endured humiliation at the dinner table. Now I am the woman who will rip the mask from their faces. At that moment I remembered my mother's silence. But I swore my silence would not become someone else's strength. It would become my strength. From the night of that dinner table, I had decided I would never be the same Jiaxin again. Earlier, I stayed silent to avoid conflict, but now I would stay silent to make them afraid. Daniel thought that after every insult I cried, that I broke down, but I had turned the game around. Now I smiled at his words, sometimes agreed and sometimes made a light joke. He couldn't understand why I had suddenly become so composed. In truth, this was my first weapon, changing his habits. "You've changed, Jiaxin," Daniel said one evening. He was sitting on the sofa drinking wine. "Earlier you argued about everything. Now you just smile. What is it that you really want?" I looked into his eyes and said, "Maybe I'm starting to understand you now." On his face appeared surprise and a trace of unease. He felt his grip on me loosening. That was exactly what I wanted. Around this time, Adrian began appearing in my life again and again. He knew I was Daniel's wife, but still he often messaged me, "Coffee? There's an art gallery today, will you come?" Each time I refused, but I never deleted his messages. I knew that if Daniel ever saw them, he would be badly disturbed. But I didn't want to play this game openly. What I needed was uncertainty. Daniel had to keep fearing that maybe I could get close to Adrian. I began deeper research on Eastbridge trading. I found out the company's business wasn't limited to legal import-export. Through several shell companies, they evaded taxes, and perhaps even did some illegal deals. If this truth came out, Daniel's family would be ruined in society. But I had to wait for the right time. One wrong step, and I could also be trapped in the same net. Daniel's mother, Margaret, had begun to keep an eye on me. She often said, "Jiaxin, you're very quiet these days. Is everything all right?" I would smile and reply, "Yes, Mother, everything's fine. I'm just adjusting to this new life." But suspicion was clear in her eyes. Perhaps she sensed that I was no longer the same innocent girl. Daniel's birthday was approaching. Margaret had arranged a big party. I thought this would be the first chance to begin my revenge. Everyone came to the party, business partners, friends, Adrian too. I deliberately talked with Adrian for a long time, laughed and joked. Daniel was watching from afar, anger plain on his face. When everyone gathered for dinner, I raised a toast. Today, I want to thank Daniel. Because of him, I've learned so much about Eastbridge trading. Suddenly, silence fell over the room. Daniel's face turned pale. I smiled and quickly changed the subject. I mean, thanks to his hard work, I'm also learning how challenging business can be. Everyone laughed again. But in Daniel's eyes, for the first time, I saw fear. After the party, on the way home, Daniel was silent while driving. Finally, he said, "Why do you need to give that toast, Jiaxin? You know why the name Eastbridge is never spoken in front of everyone?" I said innocently. "Why? Isn't it a successful company? I was only praising it." He slammed the brakes in anger and looked at me. "Jiaxin, never use that name in front of people again, understand?" I lowered my head, but inside I smiled. He was afraid, and fear was my first victory. The next morning, Margaret came into my room. She closed the door and spoke in a low voice. "You should understand, Jiaxin. Some matters women shouldn't touch. Your job is to manage the household, not business." With tears in my eyes, I said, "Mother, I just spoke by mistake. I don't even know anything." She left satisfied. But that night I wrote in my diary, "Margaret is afraid too. If the truth comes out, her reputation will be the first to fall." After the party, Adrian messaged me. "Smart move. You know your words caught everyone's attention." I was surprised. So, Adrian also understood that I was playing deliberately. Did he want to support me? Or was he finding a way to blackmail me? I did not reply. I felt it was better to keep Adrian at a distance for now, but his words echoed in my mind. In the following weeks, Daniel began to change. He got irritated at small things. His sleep was incomplete. Many times he would wake up in the middle of the night to talk on the phone. One night I overheard his conversation. "No, she knows nothing. She's just naive. I'll handle her." But his voice was trembling. I knew my little toast had shaken his foundation. I decided now it was time for the next move. This time, not directly on Daniel, but among his friends. Daniel had a close friend, Oliver. He was also wealthy, but carefree and talkative. I deliberately started a conversation with Oliver. "Oliver, I heard Eastbridge has a new deal?" He laughed. "Yes, but Daniel will get angry if I tell too much." I gave a light laugh and said, "Daniel doesn't tell me anything anyway." Oliver changed the subject, but I understood. My words were now reaching not just Daniel, but his friends too. Now there was a strange chill in the house. Daniel avoided me. Margaret reprimanded me, and I quietly continued my game. At night, when everyone slept, I went through company documents on my laptop. I found many old emails and transactions. Some money had gone directly from my father's account to Daniel's family. I saved the screenshots. These were my weapons. But I was not going to use them yet. For now, the goal was just to instill fear. One evening at dinner, I asked Daniel, "What if one day the press finds out about our company?" The glass in his hand nearly fell. He forced a smile and said, "That will never happen." I looked deeply into his eyes. "But what if it does?" He said nothing. His silence was my victory. Daniel was no longer as confident as before. Dark circles grew under his eyes. After returning from the office, he would go straight to his room. And me? I noted every unease of his. The woman he had married to control was now controlling his very breaths. One day, suddenly Adrian came to the house. Daniel was not home. Margaret was sitting in the drawing room. Adrian smiled at me and said, "Daniel is so lucky." I replied calmly, "Perhaps." Margaret looked at me suspiciously. I knew this was all I needed. A seed of doubt in Margaret's heart. Now she would tell Daniel herself. "Your wife is close to Adrian." and Daniel's suspicion and fear would increase. That night, I made another move. I sent Oliver an email from an unknown account. It simply read, "Do you know that the Singapore deal of East Bridge is clean?" The very next day, Oliver asked Daniel. Daniel exploded. "Who gave you this question?" Oliver shrugged, but Daniel's forehead was drenched in sweat. He felt as if somewhere, somehow, his secrets were slipping out. And he also suspected that I was behind it. One night, he asked me directly, "Jiaxin, why are you so interested in East Bridge? You know, this isn't for you." I looked into his eyes and smiled. "But it was my father's money, Daniel. I'm the one who brought you this far." He was shocked. Perhaps for the first time he realized that I was no longer his puppet. Now Margaret began looking at me differently. She often said, "You shouldn't think that this house belongs to your father. You are just a guest." I stayed silent. But when she turned away, I whispered to myself, "That thinking will be your downfall." One night I saw her in the mirror. She was standing staring at her own face. Her lips were muttering, "Everything is under control. Everything is under control." I did not feel pity for her, because this was my goal, to make her believe she was losing, even if nothing had actually happened yet. Slowly, I realized that Daniel was no longer as confident in front of people. At parties, he spoke less, avoided friends. Many times he locked himself in his room. My silence, my smile, my unspoken questions all sowed fear in his mind. And I knew this was only the beginning. The real game was yet to come. I wrote in my diary, "The first move worked. Daniel has begun to doubt himself. Now it's time to shake Margaret's foundation." The story of my revenge was entering its second chapter. I had begun to bring Daniel down, but now it was necessary to break his mother, Margaret. Because as long as Margaret stood tall, Daniel would never fully collapse. If Daniel was the symbol of fear and insecurity in my life, then his mother Margaret was the embodiment of power and arrogance. Orders always flashed in her eyes. She looked at me as if I were some foreign object, accidentally enhancing the beauty of her luxurious house. At every party, her laugh was the loudest. Every woman revolved around her. She considered herself the queen bee, and honestly, everyone treated her as such. But I had always heard my mother in China teach, "The greater the arrogance, the more painful the downfall." Margaret's day always began with the same routine. Early morning, her car took her to the spa, then yoga, then lunch with women from some charity board, and in the evening, either a gala or a gathering at our house. She never seemed tired. But I noticed her real fear was reputation. Once at lunch, I overheard her friend Mrs. Collins say, "Margaret, your skin always looks perfect. You look 10 years younger than your age." Margaret gave a soft laugh, but I saw in her eyes she lived for that praise. Meaning, if her public image ever faltered, everything would fall apart. I didn't yet have any major evidence nor the time for a direct strike. But I decided to plant small cracks in her perfect image. The first seed I planted at a tea party. That day, Margaret had called her group of women. I sat quietly. Then suddenly I said, "Mother, Daniel said yesterday that you worry a lot about your age." The entire hall fell silent. Margaret immediately put on a mask of laughter. "Oh, Jiaxin, this girl always jokes around." All the women laughed, but I noticed Margaret's lips were trembling. Her eyes were saying to me, "You will pay for this." But for me, this was a victory. Because once a seed of doubt is sown, it only grows. That night, Margaret complained to Daniel. I overheard from behind the wall, "Your wife is ruining my reputation. Make her stop." Daniel came to my room in anger. "You shouldn't drag my mother's name into this, understand?" I said innocently, but I was just joking. He punched the wall. "If this happens one more time, I won't tolerate it." I stayed silent. But inside I was thinking, Daniel, you think you can stop me? The real game has just begun. A few weeks later, Margaret was going to receive an award called Women in Business. That day, she worked very hard. New dress, new jewelry, and speech practice. I quietly went into her wardrobe and found her old photos, when she was young, living like a simple woman in a small town. Those pictures were the complete opposite of her sophisticated mask. On the day of the award function, I did just one thing, accidentally forwarded those photos via WhatsApp to one of Margaret's friends. Look at Margaret's old days. Isn't she different? Within moments, many women at the party began talking about those pictures. Is this really Margaret? What a change. Oh, I never thought she came from such a background. Margaret's face turned pale throughout the entire function. Her speech stumbled and faltered, and I clapped quietly, as if I knew nothing. That night, Margaret came to my room. Her eyes were red. Did you do this? I said with feigned surprise. What happened, Mother? Everyone was admiring you. She grabbed my wrist and pressed it. I'm warning you, Jiaxin. If you touch my reputation, I will throw you out of this house. I looked at her and said only, Mother, how strong your reputation is. Only people can decide that. Her face was a mix of shock and anger. And at that moment, I knew I had pressed the right nerve. Now Margaret's nights became restless. She kept looking at herself in the mirror, applying new creams on her face and trying to impress every woman. But fear had settled in her heart that her perfect image could break. And that fear was my real victory. I wrote in my diary, Daniel's fear has grown. Now Margaret's reputation is shaking. Slowly, this house will crumble under my silence. I saw Margaret truly afraid for the first time. No matter how much she shouted in anger, a silent fear began to show in her eyes. Her fear gave me strength. I knew, to bring down Margaret, her friends were my biggest ladder. The women who today flatter her all around could tomorrow leave her alone if they felt Margaret was no longer the queen bee. A few weeks later, Margaret held a big charity dinner at our house. Her goal was to shine her image again. She decorated the house, ordered expensive flowers, and invited a renowned chef. I wore very simple and calm clothes that evening. People saw me and said, Jiaxin, you look so natural. Your simplicity wins hearts. I smiled and said, oh, I'm just following habits from my village. Our mother always said respect comes from simplicity, not decoration. Hearing this, some women nodded in agreement. I noticed deep lines of tension appear on Margaret's face. She sat in her designer gown, but for the first time the light around her seemed dim. During dinner, I went close to some women and quietly said, Margaret is very strong, but sometimes it seems she is very lonely. I just threw the comment into the air, but its effect made people think. Their eyes began to focus on Margaret. Margaret's greatest strength was that people considered her perfect. I had just done one thing, reminded people that a perfect person is never truly alone. The rest was done by their imagination. After dinner, Daniel came to me. Do you know Mother hates you? He said. I answered calmly, Daniel, I just speak the truth. If someone feels hurt, maybe their layers are very thin. He stayed silent for a few moments, then left. His silence was my victory. Because now even Daniel had begun to question his mother. Margaret now often came to me, trying to talk about small things. Jiaxin, why don't you help me? You should make a name for yourself in society too. I looked at her and said, Mother, I can never be like you. People say a fake smile doesn't last long. Her eyes widened. She understood that I was striking directly at her heart. I made two women from society, Mrs. Collins and Mrs. Turner, my targets. Both loved to gossip. I casually said, do you know how strict Margaret becomes with Daniel? Sometimes I feel scared. She doesn't even let him breathe. Mrs. Turner said in surprise, really? Daniel always seems so obedient. I innocently shrugged. Maybe from the outside. That was it. Enough. The next week, I heard, people in society were saying that Margaret was very controlling at home. Once, at a tea party, Mrs. Collins joked with Margaret, "Margaret, we were all wondering why you control Daniel so much. Boys need freedom too." All the women laughed. Margaret's face turned pale. She tried to laugh, but it sounded forced. I quietly sipped my tea. My work was done. Now Margaret often appeared alone. People were staying away from her. Her perfect hostess glow began to fade. She stood in front of the mirror until late at night, trying on different gowns, but there was fatigue in her eyes. One night, I heard her crying from her room. I didn't open the door. Because this was my victory, Margaret was breaking not outside, but inside. Margaret's public image had now shaken slightly. But she still needed to be completely broken. I wanted her to fall not only in society, but also in Daniel's eyes. Because when a son doubts his mother, her foundation truly shakes. I wrote in my diary, "Now it's time to make Margaret fall in front of Daniel. Only then will my game be complete." I knew Margaret's biggest shield was her son. Daniel always obeyed her, respected her, and was perhaps blind to her faults. But if I weakened that shield, Margaret would be completely alone. One evening, I casually said to Daniel, "Do you ever feel that your mother doesn't trust you?" Daniel raised his eyebrows. "Why are you saying this?" I slowly replied, "Just, she criticizes you for every little thing. Your business decisions, your clothes, even who you talk to. She controls everything." Daniel said angrily, "She just wants what's best for me." I smiled and whispered, "Or maybe she wants what's best for her image." He went silent. That's all I needed, the first seed of doubt in his mind. Once, we had dinner with the whole family. Margaret, as always, was the center of attention. She spoke about her charity work and society events. I lightly said, "Mother, Daniel said that sometimes it feels like he can't do anything without you. Is that true?" Silence fell over the table. Daniel glared at me in anger. Margaret panicked and said, No, I never said that." But now the words were out. For the first time, Daniel's eyes showed displeasure toward his mother. A few days later, I deliberately forwarded an email written in Margaret's name to Daniel. The email said, "I am the only one who can guide Daniel in business right now. He has his own mind, but no experience." In reality, Margaret had written that email to her friend, but I accidentally sent it to Daniel. Daniel became furious. He said to his mother, "Do you think I'm a child? Can't I make decisions myself?" Margaret panicked. "Daniel, it's just, I worry about you." But Daniel's trust had begun to break. I delivered the final blow at a big party. That day, Margaret had invited many prominent society figures. I quietly took a small note from her diary, where she had written about her insecurities regarding her age. "If I start looking old, everyone will abandon me." At the party, I deliberately left that note on a table. Some women read it. Then the gossip began. "Margaret is obsessed with her age. Looks like she has insecurities." When Margaret heard it, her face turned pale. She stood there, but now people were talking at a distance, not around her. Daniel saw everything too. Shame and anger were clearly visible in his eyes. That night, Margaret came to my room. Her eyes were swollen, her hair disheveled. For the first time, she admitted defeat and said, "What do you want, Jiaxin?" I said calmly, "Just the truth that people cannot see behind your mask." She stared at me for a few moments, then slowly said, "You think you've won?" I smiled and said, "No, Mother, the victory is for the people who have finally seen the real Margaret." Tears flowed from her eyes, and I understood then, Margaret was broken. Daniel had begun to distance himself from his mother. He spoke less, doubted everything she said. Margaret had become a subject of ridicule in society. For me, that was enough. I wrote in my diary, Margaret's empire has collapsed. The next target is Daniel himself. Because when both son and mother fall, the foundation of this house will vanish. Why do you always twist my words, Jiaxin? Daniel's voice echoed at the dinner table that night. The pasta on the plate had gone cold, but the heat between us seemed to burn the whole room. I said calmly, because I have grown accustomed to hearing your truth, and that truth is always different, Daniel. What you say outside, you never follow inside the house. Margaret was silent. Tears were in her eyes. But this time she wasn't crying because of me, but because of her son. Because she saw Daniel was no longer the perfect husband whose mask she had worn for years. Daniel had always been a two-faced man. Outside, confident, charming, successful businessman. Inside, angry, insecure, and lying to hide his failures. I had realized this right after marriage. But then I stayed silent, thinking maybe love would change him one day. Now I understood, love doesn't change anyone, only the mirror of truth does. Daniel had always been a two-faced man. Outside, confident, charming, successful businessman. Inside, angry, insecure, and lying to hide his failures. I had realized this right after marriage, but then I stayed silent, thinking maybe love would change him one day. Now I understood, love doesn't change anyone, only the mirror of truth does. Daniel's business partner, Michael, had always treated me very politely. One day I casually said, Michael, how lucky Daniel is. He always gets such a special offers. Hotels in Vegas, luxury bars. Sometimes I wonder, does he do this for business or for fun? Michael was surprised. Vegas? Daniel told me he only goes there to meet investors. I smiled innocently and said, oh, maybe I misunderstood. But I knew Michael would start doubting Daniel. And in the business world, doubt is the deadliest poison. A few days later, we went to a charity event. There, everyone called Daniel the perfect husband because he held my hand and introduced me to everyone. As I walked onto the stage, I casually grabbed the microphone and said, Daniel is very caring. He always takes care of my little needs, whether it's leaving me home alone for repeated business trips or staying late at night celebrating with clients. Honestly, sometimes I wonder, where is his real home, ours or his office? People laughed and clapped. But I saw the blush on Daniel's face that only comes from shame. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. On the way home, Daniel erupted in anger. You humiliated me in front of everyone. I said softly, no, Daniel, I only said what you've been doing for years. The only difference is that this time, people were listening. Margaret sat quietly in the backseat of the car. Her eyes were fixed out the window. I felt that maybe she was thinking, my son's perfect image is now just a facade. In the following weeks, Daniel grew restless. He often stayed locked in his office late at night. Sometimes he spoke in low tones on the phone, sometimes he looked at me with suspicious eyes. One day he said to me, you think you can expose me? I can handle everything. Looking into his eyes, I said, Daniel, I am not exposing you. You are taking off your own mask. The only difference is that this time, people are watching. I knew it was difficult to break Daniel directly. He had money, friends, and most importantly, ego. But that ego was both his greatest weapon and his biggest weakness.